Lack of accountability, in my opinion, is sort of the root of so many problems in organizations. And we often don't name it that, but when I dissect it, that's what it is. So I am not for super small spans of control, because I think that also can cause a lot of problems.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm your host, Jessica Neal, and today I am here. I'm so excited because we're going to take a little different take on the show today. We're going to have a panel discussion on a topic which I'm sure many of you are interested in: flat organizations, or should you have hierarchy in your organization? We don't know the right answer, but we're going to dig into it today. And I have one of my favorite people here who has been on the show many times and has co-hosted the show with me. Bob Sutton is here. Hi, Bob.
Hi, great to see you and everybody else.
Yes, and another guest who's been on the show before, Beth Steinberg, who we all love. Hi, Beth. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. Nice to be here again.
Yes, it's so good to have you. And Michael Arena is here, and he is a first-timer, so welcome, Michael.
So I should be saying like first-time caller. Thrilled to be on the show, but
yeah, first-time caller, long-time
listener.
listener. Yes. Well, Michael, first, before we get started, give us a little intro on you. I know Bob thinks the world of you. And what did you say? How did you describe him a minute ago?
He's the most academic person I know who has been a real senior executive multiple times. He actually can do both, which is kind of rare.
What?
Actually.
Well, and coming from Professor Bob, that's a big compliment, Michael. So tell us about yourself. Why are you so academic?
Last time Bob did that, he was a little more straightforward. He said, "You're weird." And I said, under most circumstances, I would be terribly offended. But since Bob Sutton said that, I'm going to take it as a compliment. So
it's a compliment. It's a compliment.
So.
Yes.
So that is true. I tend to call myself a pracademic. I bridge academia, and I'm in academics right now. So I'm a dean of a business school, Kroll School of Business here in Los Angeles, right outside Los Angeles. But, I have been an executive, and I've hung my hat mostly in the talent space.
Right.
So I was chief talent officer at General Motors post-bankruptcy to help, really usher in turnaround there, which was a blast. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that, but then was at Amazon Web Services as that business was a rocket ship growing.
Never heard of it.
unlike not in the last couple of days either.
Yeah, right.
So that's my background, really a talent professional, but mostly I've studied human dynamics. So we'll talk. I'm pretty one-dimensional, even though I span those two spaces, and most of my research and practice is about collaboration.
Yeah. Well, I think to be a great talent professional, knowing human dynamics is so important. So, but I am a talent professional, but not an academic, but I have not gotten the same compliment from Bob about being weird. So, I'm not.
You're weird in your own way. You're weird in a different way.
I'm weird in a different way. Okay. Well, Beth, remind everybody who you are and where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm Beth Steinberg, and I've been a long time chief people officer type at many different companies, had senior positions at large companies like Nordstrom and Nike, was the first VP of people at Facebook in 2006, done a lot of startups, was most recently the chief people officer at Chime, taking it, through their high growth stage. And now I'm semi-retired. I work part-time for Alphabet for the Moonshot Factory, helping a company called Tapestry. And I also am an executive coach and sit on a couple boards and advisory boards. So I guess I'm really maybe not semi-retired. So That's what I do. And I actually am a wannabe academic. I try to write and study stuff, so I'm a little bit jealous of Michael being both, because I kind of am a wannabe academic.
Yeah. Well, I'm a wannabe academic too, and I don't think I'll ever be, but that's okay. But
Same.
we don't need to remind people who you are. They know and love you.
I'm an old organizational psychologist. Anyway,
Yes.
so
And you're a professor. You are an academic.
I'm a professor emeritus. So I'm sort of retired the same way that Beth is, I would say.
Yes.
So let's get started. This topic's amazing.
Yeah. So, Bob, you were sort of the idea behind this discussion. Tell us why you wanted to talk about this.
I wanted to talk about it because it seems like everywhere I go, including one of my colleagues, Rebecca Hines, and I have been doing some interviews about AI in work. In fact, we interviewed both Michael and Beth for it. And everybody keeps talking about how they're in these organizations. There's many of the people we interviewed where things are getting flatter and flatter. And then I realized that Beth did a brilliant LinkedIn post about it, and Michael has actual data. So maybe, Jessica, help me. Maybe we can start, and let's start with Beth and then go to Michael. Each of you make a case overly flat organizations, excessive span of control. So Beth, why don't you go first?
Sure.
And then we'll have Michael go. So I want to hear your case.
Yeah. So I believe in sort of just enough management, just enough hierarchy. I mean, I think you can, go too far in either direction. I think we're seeing a lot of that. But when I've been in very flat organizations, what I have experienced is employees not really understanding what they're responsible for, not getting the feedback that they need, not feeling like their career is progressing, not really having sort of that sense of trust and community with their leader. And I think that has a lot of long-term consequences for the organization. I think it can also cause a lack of accountability, which I think is, I think about this a lot. I think lack of accountability, in my opinion, is sort of the root of so many problems in organizations. And we often don't name it that, but when I dissect it, that's what it is. So I am not for super small spans of control, because I think that also can cause a lot of problems. And happy to share some examples of that. But I do think people want to know what they're responsible for. People want to have a relationship with their leader, feel like they work for somebody that they trust and respect. They want to get feedback, and they want to have a way to learn and grow. And so, that's why I believe there has to be just enough, structure and hierarchy.
And looking at your LinkedIn post, which we'll put in the notes for this episode.
Sure.
I love your headline, which is managers waking up at 4:30 a.m. feeling inadequate. So it's hard on the managers who have a zillion.
It is. It definitely is. I mean, I think nobody wants to feel like they're disconnected from their, in my estimation, maybe some people do. They're, I don't know if they probably shouldn't be a leader, but one of the reasons why I stayed being a leader of people for so long is I got a lot of personal satisfaction out of helping people learn and grow and building those trusting relationships with my team. And I think it's very difficult for managers to feel like they have no control over that. And, I do feel like there's a real loss of control when you have 22 people reporting to you. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that feels good to anybody.
No.
Okay, so that's a beautiful. Okay, Michael, why don't you sort of give your perspective, which is similar to Beth's with some money. With some data. Sorry, not money.
Money. What money?
Money.
I wish I had some money with it. No, I mean, I agree with everything Beth said, and I think certainly from an employee stance, when you get disengagement, all those things begin to occur. I won't go as far as saying flatter is not better. I think it just completely depends. And I think it's like everything with management. We tend to be looking for blunt instruments that are universal And that's almost never the truth. And so we study everything else inside organizations very comprehensively. We look at supply chains, we look at process flows, but we don't study people the same way. So the reality is, and the data says, Bob, that it really just depends. If you're, there are some times where you want to go small to go fast. Almost all the work I'm doing right now is on AI adoption. And yet we're not thinking about the burden on managers. And Beth, referred to this for sure. And one of the things we found was, as we go in and analytically, and I did some partnership work with Workalytics in particular for this case study, what was found was, once you get to like a 7 to 8 span level on a team, especially a team that needs to move really fast, you start to break the manager. You start adding more people to the manager, and I agree with everything that Beth said about the employees, but just to go to the very problem you're trying to solve, speed, the solution oftentimes actually exacerbates the problem. And what we found was the manager in these cases ended up becoming overloaded and overwhelmed, and they were already overloaded and overwhelmed. So I think there's just a whole different starting point than saying, should we flatten or shouldn't we flatten? I think the starting point needs to be, how do we measure speed and velocity of work? And where do we need to move faster? We always talk about augmentation and automation, but we rarely talk about acceleration. And, I'm an engineer by undergrad, and there's this old theory called theory of constraints that you look for the bottlenecks and you work on the bottlenecks. And I think a much better approach than just saying, let's flatten and think about spans and levels is to actually just say, where in fact are the constraints, and why don't we go solve that? And in a collaboration manner, which is, again, I confess, the only lens I look at, sometimes what you might be doing is the equivalent of just pushing traffic, opening up another lane on the highway and pushing the bubble farther down the highway. And that's what some of the flattening initiatives do, where leaders are overwhelmed, you give them more stuff, and all you're doing is pushing the decision risk somewhere further down the highway, and it breaks there next. So I think the theory is the wrong starting point.
Yeah, I agree.
So Beth, maybe you can describe this since you're in the middle of Silicon Valley, at least spiritually. You have so much experience. So why are so many organizations flattening anyways? Given all the pain that we're hearing from our friends, I mean, we're hearing stories of pain.
I think a couple of reasons. Number one, I do think that, the few years back when things were going gangbusters, too many managers were hired and promoted. And I think that was, and I think, Bob, this is one of my big pet peeves is, I think companies did that to reward and retain people, and it had a really negative ramification. I always think about, what are the perverse incentives that we're doing inside companies, right? And I think this was one of them. So I think one of the reasons that it's happening is some of it probably needed to happen. I have examples of even companies that I've been in where you take a minute and you look at the structure and you're like, holy cow, we have, 10 managers in one department that have 2 direct reports each. Well, that really slows, when you talk about velocity, Michael, in my opinion, that really slows things down, because who's making the decisions and who's doing the real work. And so, some of it probably needed to be done. My guess is that most of it's being done as well as just a cost cutting measure, and, I think a way to try to make things leaner inside the organization. But I think in many, many cases, we've gone way too far.
I agree. And, I think what I see a lot of companies doing, and Michael, it'll be interesting to see if you experience this too. But, and this is something that we always resisted at Netflix. And I think that you're right. Some of these structures come from a well-intended way of rewarding and promoting employees. But then it adds all of this layers and levels and complexity. you hear these companies and I'll be talking to a CHRO and she's like, oh, people want to know their career path. So we need to add levels. People want to know like our promotion. So we need to add more levels, and at Netflix, we kept things very flat. So it wasn't that we didn't have any hierarchy. We sort of, to your point, Beth, had just enough. It was IC, manager, director, VP, and C-level. We never did the senior director. We never did the senior VP. We never did the senior VP. We resisted that. And we didn't actually have, at the IC layer, we didn't have levels either. We didn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Everybody was just an IC. Right. And you were, we called everybody senior, whatever, senior engineer, senior marketer. And, but we certainly had sometimes from the employees push to do more, but it was like, we're not, because it's going to add complexity into the system that we don't want. This is going to add complexity into the system that we don't want. And I think that that's where a lot of the complexity starts, is that pressure that companies feel to kind of control the chaos of, managers, to have an incentive reward program to promote people, reward people. But to Beth's point, when organizations are thinking about this, they never think, and this is something that Michael said as well, they never think about, one, is that something that we want and need, right? And is that how we really want to reward people? They kind of look at what so-and-so, what Facebook did or what this company did, and they just sort of slap the same playbook. They don't think uniquely about their own business. And then it's really hard to unwind, right? Like once you have it going. And to Michael's point, it doesn't solve the problem that you're trying to solve. It doesn't accelerate things. And to Beth's point, in fact, you end up with people who are managing 1 or 2 or 3 people, and that slows everything down. So I don't know. I think I've just seen a lot of companies get into we got to do this because our employees want it. But I don't think that's the right thing to do.
No. So Michael, what's your take on this?
I mean, again, I think that's why this is such a complex issue. Is there's an employee issue, there's a manager issue, there's a career issue, there's a business issue. So we almost have to start with like, what's the core problem we're trying to solve?
Right.
And I mean, the way I think about this is form follows function, and like, what's the function, and then the form, as opposed to just mandating lower, smaller, shorter spans of control or smaller spans of control, if I could get it out of my mouth properly. But the real, I think, so the way I like to think about this from a network standpoint is, where do you need speed and where do you need stability? It turns out that flatter and larger teams in driving stable outcomes, where you need to be efficient, where you need to reduce risk, where you need to build things that truly work, flatter actually helps a little. But it turns out that if you're moving fast, you want small, at Amazon, we would call them 2 pizza teams. You want small teams. You want to start to think about the agile approach to working. And it's almost like you got to think about what's the function you're trying to solve for and then go after form, as opposed to universally saying that everyone will have spans of 8 to 10, and we're going to have no more than 3 layers. In one place, you may have 7 layers. In another place, you may have 2. And I just think that we try to solve this with simple-minded solutions, and it's a complex problem, as we've heard here. There are all kinds of different outcomes and stakeholders.
And I think you're mentioning a good point. It's not like a one-size-fits-all.
So it's really interesting, because one reason I'm so intrigued by both of your perspective on the sort of the great flattening and the problem that's caused is that the contrary cases are these organizations with extreme spans of control and are very flat. So I have a particular obsession. I think that I've dragged Beth into this too, with like, how does Nvidia operate?
Yes.
Jensen Huang has, depending who you listen to, including him, he has between 38 and 60 direct reports. He doesn't do one-on-ones. He believes everybody should be on the same sheet music, and he does stuff like when he gives feedback to an executive, he does it in front of all 60 or 40 of them. And
sounds fun.
And he doesn't have any regular meetings and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I keep asking. I asked our friend Charles O'Reilly at Stanford how this works, who's a great academic. And I actually was talking to a former colonel about this yesterday too. And their perspective is interesting. And Jessica, this may have happened at Netflix too, which is that to the extent you have people who all understand the mission, so the mission is boss is one of Jensen's phrases.
Yeah.
And to the extent, so they understand or what Charles O'Reilly was saying, commander's intent, like everybody is on the same page.
Yeah.
That you can have a flatter organization. Their perspective is that just going in and pulling out 5 layers that has always been more command and control, and it doesn't work. But if the organization is set up with that logic from the beginning, it may work. So I don't know what Beth or what you think about that, but that's sort of where I'm coming to, and maybe other people have different perspectives.
Yeah, I think when you and I first started talking about it, Bob, like that was something that came to my mind, and Beth certainly mentioned this when she's sort of giving her thoughts on this. Like if the organization has great communication and clarity and context, I don't think it matters really the structure, right? That is the hardest thing to do, is to be clear, to be aligned, to have everybody understand the mission, to your point. If you can pull that off, like that's harder than the structure. And, it doesn't matter whether you have a lot of hierarchy or maybe you're flat. If you have good context and clarity, I think that solves a lot of problems.
I agree with that. I mean, I think, Bob did drag me into this a little bit, but I've been very fascinated with Nvidia because I think when I kind of look across tech companies, it's clear that company is run in a very special way and that it's run by a very special leader. And I'm not sure it can be replicated. He has been there, I think, over 30 years. So he really understands, obviously, the company, the product. He is the visionary. He seems, I've never met him, but from what I hear, he is like a good guy. He's a stand-up guy. And so one thing I was thinking about is, there's probably not a lot of tolerance for politics there. Information is not power there. And, because he does apparently, try to share the same information with all, levels of people and all at once. And so you can see how that could work. Could it be replicated? I think it would be very, very difficult, but I am not skeptical about it. I think it works, and I think there's very specific reasons why it works.
The weirdest thing is the accountability part and how he does accountability is public performance. At least I just watched an interview with him. And so this I can't believe, Jessica and Michael. So he actually doesn't really like firing people and rarely does. He has this phrase of torturing people into greatness. He thinks everybody can be great, which is a lot different.
I do too.
Good for you. I actually am more of the Charles O'Reilly school, which is get rid of them fast when they're not working. But maybe that's my problem.
Yeah.
So, Michael, what's your take on all this madness?
I'm wondering if the next podcast is torturing people into greatness. That was my first thought. Yeah, I think Beth said this. It all depends on the company. I think a lot of it, we haven't talked at all about culture so far, and I think it depends on what are the initial conditions. Does this work for Nvidia? I don't know nearly enough about Nvidia, but clearly it seems to be working. And the people that I do talk to there are happy. They like it. They enjoy it. It's fast. It's high velocity. It kind of fits the vibe and the culture. The one thing, Bob, that I thought about was he thinks about scaling one-on-many versus one-on-one. And that's a cultural trait. If you've got a lot of employees that need high touch, if you've grown up in a culture where people need high touch, they need constant direction or calibrations and check-ins. It would be very hard to operate in that environment. And I think, just to be tactical about it for a second, I think about a pharmaceutical company that we've recently worked with that is very high touch, very relationship oriented, that tried to flatten themselves out. And the reality is that the nice culture of this institution, which if I mention the name, everyone would love this company, actually is a liability when you flatten yourself out, because you don't streamline the decision making because you still want to keep all your friends and buddies connected in what's coming around the corner. So you were still, it didn't change communication a single bit by reducing layers and changing spans. So I think the initial conditions matter immensely, and what might work at Nvidia or in the average tech company might not work in many, many other companies that have started from a very different place.
So I love the example of culture, and there is a structural element to it too. And I'm curious what other folks think of culture, but at least just in the interview that and stuff I've been reading, he says that the 60 or 40 span of control doesn't scale downward. As you get lower in the organization, the spans of control get smaller. So that's what he's doing, but I'd be very curious to see what it looks like all the way down. So that's another part of the story.
Yeah, and it might be, that sort of makes sense that it gets smaller when you go down, because maybe that senior most team, that 60 people, he knows really well. And maybe since he doesn't fire anybody, he's worked with them for years, knows how to torture them, I guess.
To greatness.
To greatness. So those relationships are very strong, right? And there's like a trust and a culture that's bred there that they just have, that a lot of organizations probably don't have, right?
It is, Bob. I'm so glad you added that dimension about deeper in the organization, because again, I think this is like a speed stability thing as you're thinking about where do you need to go really fast. And we know, based on some great work from places like Asana, that as you get larger, you spend more time talking about the work about work as opposed to being in. The reason Amazon even had two pizza teams or has two pizza teams is because there's not a coordination tax associated with small teams of people that are synchronized working on a task. They don't need to slow down and add more coordination. They can just be about the work. And so that's what I was wondering, not knowing a whole lot about how Nvidia operates, is where they're building stuff, where they're inventing stuff, where they're creating new. What do the teams look like there as opposed to where they're scaling, where they're bringing things to market. Those are like two different functions that require different forms, at least in the network.
So manufacturing is different than developing the product. So, I mean, it's such an interesting problem. The other thing that I was thinking, the other side of this, and both of you, I've had conversations about this, is one hallmark of companies that avoid this excessive people, excessive hierarchy, is they're actually much slower to hire people and more hesitant to add people. And so my understanding of Amazon, and I certainly know about Apple, I was just talking to, former Apple executives are like they were in the CIA. They like getting information out of them, even current one, not let alone current ones. But both Amazon and Apple, when everybody was hiring like crazy, are actually hesitate to add people. Yeah. Throw people at problems. So I'm curious, since you both were, all three of you were in the talent space, so how do you balance that? Well, we're growing, but how do we not throw too many people or proliferate too many positions as the organization grows, either horizontally or vertically? Because when I think of Apple and Amazon, I think of places that have been slower to do that than other competitors.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have I think, Bob, you know this. I mean, I have a very strong perspective on this, that many tech companies just overhire like crazy. And I think what I see, a couple things have happened. I think it's slowing down a little bit now, but I think so many people are hired that you do not actually see wait until people are integrated and productive to actually see what else you need. And I think it's the easiest solve for people to say, I have X problem, I need X person to solve it. And, I try to challenge my teams with looking at, what other ways can we solve it? Is there a cultural issue that's causing us not to move as fast as we need to? Is there a structural issue? Is there a talent issue? Do we not have the right people, or are they not being deployed in the right way? Or is there a process and systems problem? So, sort of trying to dissect all of that before saying we need another person. But I just think there's so many things that we reward people. If you have a big team, you're going to make more money. You're going to, there's so many, and we talked about this before, again, there's perverse incentives to hiring lots and lots of people.
There are. And I think, one of the things that I was thinking of, and I agree with everything you said, but Bob, who is the gentleman that we had on the show as your friend, the subtraction guy?
Leidy Klotz wrote the book
Yes.
Subtract. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Every time there's a problem, humans they try to solve it by adding, not subtracting.
There's the book.
Yeah. And so there's the
with
book.
my coffee stain on it.
And so, I do think that also is a problem. It's like, okay, oh God, we got this new thing we need to figure out. We need to hire 50 people. It's like, no, maybe not. But that is the first place everybody goes is to more, not less. So I think that is part of the problem.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. And we haven't talked, just because we're talking about books, we haven't talked about friction and the power of friction in the system as well, just to put a plug in for Bob. But I think sometimes it's easy just to keep adding bodies and adding people and not think about how do you keep stretching the current leaders and managers to take on bigger assignments. And that is kind of Amazon's magic. I want to come back to one other element that I think, we can dance past around behaviors. It's, you build it like you're an inventor, you're a creator, you designed this new thing, but then you got to manage it. And that's a different muscle group. You got to learn how to do both. And the best great leaders are able to do both. So it would be easy to say, this thing's growing, let's go hire more bodies. But the better thing for the organization long term is to take those leaders that have built it and then teach them how to, or challenge themselves,
yes,
to teach themselves how to scale it and operate it. And then I think what you've got is, like this, from a talent perspective, this really resilient organization that can constantly flex between build and run. So that's one thing. The other tension is, many of the organizations, both Apple and Amazon and others that we might throw into this category that don't overhire on a whim, they protect their culture. So there's,
yes.
I know we keep talking around culture, but there is actually, and I can give the analytics on this, there's actually great analytics to say that if you overhire, it's very easy to lose your culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we were able to look at all the different behaviors inside of that culture and actually put them on a continuum, evaluate them, and we're able to look at, here are the behaviors that are taught. Any new human being can come in and we could teach these things very quickly, but here are the behaviors that are caught. Here are the behaviors that must be modeled because they're so, in Amazon's language, peculiar that you can't describe them. They're very tacit. And if you overhire and you have too much newness, what ends up happening is you don't have legacy, people that understand the nuances of some of the culture. And what you end up doing is you end up destroying your culture. So I think there's a whole sort of tension mechanism to think about. When do you, it's good to hire some people because they bring in fresh ideas. But if you overhire too quickly, you begin to dilute the thing that made you successful. And it's like everything we're talking about here, there's a fine line of over-indexing in either direction that could be problematic.
But that is interesting. I'm thinking of, I won't name them, but there's a couple of once great companies that I've worked with, and you could see the inflection point where they'd be doing great and they just hire like crazy and they would just lose something.
Yeah.
And I think all of us have seen that movie. On the culture thing, one of my favorite stories, and I got to be careful because I may be breaking a confidence here, but I won't use his name, but a friend of mine who was an executive at Apple, and he got a request to hire an assistant for an executive in London. And Tim Cook hauled him in his office, my friend, and said, let's look at the layout of the floor. He actually literally wanted to look at the schematic of the floor to see if this executive could share an assistant with it who was already there instead of hiring the person. And they did end up hiring the person, but my friend said the reason Tim did that was because he didn't care about one, it's a 100,000 plus person. He wanted to convey to me, our culture is we don't throw bodies at people. We actually have to think about it. And I just thought that was a beautiful example of just being careful with the culture, not to overhire or over waste money either. So I thought that was beautiful.
No, that is beautiful. And one of the things I obsessed about at Netflix is this new problem. And I was like, we cannot have new on new. It just, to that point, Michael, of that legacy of, one of the brilliance of Netflix was that when everybody came in, you could see the culture at work. you saw everybody doing it. You saw everybody giving feedback. You saw everybody being transparent. You saw everybody doing context, not control. But if there was just all this newness, you wouldn't see any of it, right? And so we had to really pay attention to where that was happening within different functions and teams and groups, because I was like, well, this is going to get out of control. And I think a lot of companies just don't really have a pulse on that.
Yep.
I want to give a counter. I totally 100% agree with all of this. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that Nvidia is able to run the way they're able to run. I'll give a counter example, which there's probably not a ton of these, but Nike never hired almost anybody from outside Nike for many, many years. And it was a super strong culture, probably some of it positive, some of it not. And in fact, some really great talent who came in, the system sort of rejected them. But they were, when I was there, they were kind of so insular because they had been, so homegrown that they didn't see some of the business problems, like, being digital. They didn't really see that until it was almost too late. And so I think you have to do a little bit of both. I think you have to stay consistent. Huge fan of not overhiring, but you also sometimes need a fresh perspective in order to make sure that you're not, kind of so insular, you're not seeing the problems that exist.
No, absolutely agree.
Well, and I could not agree anymore, Beth. And that includes when you're not growing. And again, Bob knows the story well, but that is one of the ways to think about the decline of General Motors was that they stopped hiring. So there was not fresh thinking. It was very insular, and it became a little bit of, no pun intended, like breathing your own exhaust and staying focused on the thing that made you successful before without having connectivity to the shifting market or markets. And I think that's equally as dangerous, and even in growth mode, because the market, especially today, with the markets changing so radically, some turnover. And this happens both in incoming and outgoing, right? Some turnover is just super healthy to create a little bit of that tension in the organization to not settle in and start to believe that what made you successful, again, our good friend Charles O'Reilly would call it the success trap. Yes. And it's a cultural thing more than it is sort of a hierarchical thing.
Yeah. And go ahead, Bob.
I just real quickly, and then I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jessica. There's the most famous organizational theorist, I think, the best ever is the late James March, and he did all these statistical models of essentially, if you want innovation, there's an optimal level of bringing in outsiders, and he had this beautiful twist of people who are slow learners. These are people who are kind of impossible to socialize. And he always said, if you want innovation, you need a certain number of people who are never going to drink the Kool-Aid, no longer how long they're there. And I always loved, he had this model you needed. And by the way, he used to write poetry, and one of his poetry books, which I have back here, is called Slow Learner. So he definitely was not affected by any organization he was in. But I love those two things. Jessica, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, I think, I just wanted to, agree with Michael on the success trap. And I mean, that you all probably remember Quickster, but Quickster was our obsession about the success trap, right? Because, and strategically.
You should tell our listeners what Quickster is, because probably hardly anybody knows.
Yeah, a lot of them don't remember DVDs maybe. So we were a DVD by mail business, and that was providing all of the cash for innovation around streaming. Reed's obsession, and rightfully so, is he did not want the success of DVD to hold us back from the innovation of streaming. And he basically wanted us to sever it and not really think about it. And hence the publicly, I guess, demise of Quickster, because we launched Quickster, and that was really the DVD business could go off and do whatever they wanted, and the rest of us were just going to stay and focus on streaming. There was a revolt from the customers. They hated what we did, and rightfully so. We didn't have to do it so external. We could have done this like sort of severing internally with nobody knowing. But, it was that obsession of the success trap, because Reed did not want us to let DVD prevent us from making that second S curve. And I think a lot of companies, I mean, you can name them all. I mean, Yahoo, Blockbuster, right? Like, because there's just that unwillingness to bring in new people, to innovate, to take risk, to do any of that, because you're still relying on the thing that made you successful in the first place.
Okay, so I have a question for both of you and I don't know the answer to this because there's so much hype and confusion. So how is AI going to change this story? What's the bullshit and what's the truth? Or what do you believe is the truth? Because I'm hearing the great flattening with AI. Well, we can do so much more, that we can have 40 direct reports or something. So what's your take on, and Michael, you're studying this right now, aren't you?
Yeah. I think we only all have opinions right now. So I'm like a definitive authority on this. I mean, I think one of the places I look at is, again, just trying to be an innovator, is like, where's the lead users on this stuff? And the place I would go first to actually start answering your question is like, what are the AI native startups doing? And the answer is, we've gone from 2 pizza teams to 1 pizza teams is the way I think about it, because the agents are augmenting the team, and it's awesome for startups, right? Because they reduce cash burn. They can maybe accelerate the velocity of the business, but at a minimum. So I believe that this becomes a bigger issue in the future inside, and I'm using that as a signal to pull back into corporations. I think we're going to see teams get smaller in spite of this conversation, and I think we're going to see leaders become more burdened because if the velocity of these groups are making building faster and faster and faster, then the synchronization decisions at the next level until AI does that as well is going to create an even greater, I'll call it, decision tax on the key leaders. So my fear, and I can't prove this, I've seen some early anecdotes, but my fear is that managers are going to become more important than ever, and high judgment is going to become essential because they're not going to have time to slow down and make decisions, because we operate at the speed of humans and organizations are going to start to operate at the speed. So I think, again, I'm sure we'll figure this out and find a fix or a correction to this, but I can anticipate, just based on what we're seeing in startups, that, that's going to become a problem here sometime around the.
Interesting.
Beth, what do you think?
That makes sense.
Well,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
it does make sense. I mean, I think I hadn't thought too much about, kind of it increasing speed and what that's going to do. I think in terms of, I think it's going to be exceedingly helpful, and I've already seen it be exceedingly helpful in a lot of the people processes that were super burdensome for managers, writing feedback or doing a customized development plan, things like that. I mean, you can do so fast. And I think that really can help leaders. And I know, a couple of AI companies are actually trying to, eat their own dog food, trying to do those things internally. And then we'll share the learnings externally. And so I think that will be really helpful. But I think to Michael's point, if things are moving 2x, 3x as fast, that certainly is going to have a burden on leaders.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about the speed either. The thing that I keep thinking about is that the skill that leaders especially and teams also are going to have to learn is that human to human skill.
Yes.
Right, like that will need to be
For sure.
more, right? And so that's something that, but I do think that speed is very interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, and that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So and I'm very biased on this next 2 sentences, but I think the speed of building those relationships is going to become more important as well.
Yeah, I agree.
A big piece of research we're doing right now is we believe our networks have always mattered, but now it's going to accelerate, and being able to surge into a new team, build rapid trust, but then not get yourself overwhelmed, because what it takes to build trust gets you sucked into the center. So then you're going to have to think about So I think the talent, since we're all, at least most of us are ex-talent people, I think the way we think about talent management is going to change radically in the age of AI, because the way human beings, leaders, individuals move into teams, get themselves decoupled from the center of the network and then work out across the organization, like those moves are going, and we've got some early signal that says that those moves are going to matter more than ever to your future success and career.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things we learned from our 100 thing, we did all these interviews, is this idea that AI magnifies. So that would mean if you have bad, mistrustful relationships, it'll magnify it faster. And then the opposite. So, and that's that's the point I wanted to get from Michael is that a destructive relationship could do even more damage.
Yeah. Interesting.
More efficiently. Anyways.
What were you going to say, Beth?
Well, what I was going to say is, I've been actually thinking about this a lot. Collaboration, the skill of being a good collaborator is so essential and probably not as rewarded and probably not sussed out thoroughly enough. When we hire, when we promote somebody to leader, but when I think about how fast things are going to be moving, if you are not a good collaborator, you are in a lot of trouble. But we don't really emphasize collaboration in the ways that we should, and reward it in the ways that we should at any level, at individual contributor level or at leadership level. Because I agree, absolutely. I love teams that kind of go in, move out, work on the next thing, go in, go out. I mean, I think that's good for the employees too. I think they can learn a lot. I think it stretches them in a really incredible way. I love that model, but you have to be a good collaborator.
That's such a good point. And it's not rewarded.
It's not usually.
Yeah.
So, and sussed out. I mean, for sure.
And it's funny, like we can go full circle to is flatter better. Then the question becomes, is a network, like is great collaboration always better? And the answer is like, there is a statistically negative correlation to top performers, top 20% performers in large networks. So if you've got a large network, you are far less likely to be in the top 20 percentile. So absolutely, Beth, everything you just said up until a certain point, and then you got to collaborate less because then your network starts to manage you, and you're not able to actually get stuff done.
Interesting.
You're in the matrix.
Exactly. Here we go.
So we're getting towards the end. Jessica, you want to ask a final question? What are your wrap-ups for Beth and Michael?
Well, I think for one, thank you both.
Yes, thank you.
Such a wonderful conversation. My brain is like spinning because I'm just thinking of all of these things, and I want to go out and help all these companies figure out how to do this because nobody's quite doing it right. But maybe we can sum it up in sort of the 2 to 3 takeaways for the listeners for this. Michael, for the listeners, what's the 1 or 2 takeaways you have for them if they're thinking about this in their organization today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm repeating a little, but form follows function. Like start with what's the outcome, what's the desired outcome, and then build a solution. Don't mandate upon everybody like, hey, maybe we do need to get flatter in places, and maybe we actually need to add a layer someplace else. And I think if we're disciplined enough to work backwards from the business outcome and or the employee outcomes, then we'll be much smarter about the way we would deploy solutions.
That's a good wrap up. Beth, what have you to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, kind of one size does not fit all. And so you have to apply, what works for your organization. But then I think also, to Michael's point throughout the conversation, a culture that supports all this is critically important because I think, I have seen terrible structures that had great cultures and they made it work. Right. And I've seen, probably academically sound structures that should have worked that did not work because there was not a good culture. There wasn't trust in the leader. So, you have to think about kind of both sides of the equation if you really want to make things work and go fast and have, engaged human beings inside your company.
So good. Yes, Bob.
Just the message I take away, actually from all three of you, is that if you have trust in people who have the skill to collaborate, you can get away with a less perfect or more screwed up structure because the talent offsets it. Actually, so that's a message that I don't know if that's true, but that's a message I'm hearing.
Yes. No, and I think, again, one thing that I'm just reminded of is that it doesn't have to be perfect, and probably your structure never will be perfect. But if you have that culture that both Michael and Beth are talking about, and you have clarity and great communication and great context, you can achieve a lot of things.
I love that.
Thank you all
for this.
It was so good. It was so
Thanks
special.
For having us.
So fun. Hopefully you'll both come back.
Yeah, I seem to be constantly interviewing the two of you. It's just, in fact, Beth and I have another one coming up. So I learned so much from you folks. Thank you so much.
I did too. And Michael, it was so great to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And Beth,
thank you
thanks again for coming again.
Yes,
of course.
And
great.
So now
to see
you're an honorary member, Beth. Your third time's coming.
Thank you. Happy to do it.
Okay.
So much fun. Thank you, everyone. That was a blast. I could do this all day, actually. It's fun.
Yeah, me too.
So fun.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks.